Good evening. I want to extend my appreciation to our counselors, administrators, and all our staff that work in our schools to support the academic, social, and emotional and physical needs of our students. This report is a snapshot of data for the Pleasantville Union Free School District from last year, the 23-24 school year. So I'll begin with some general information. These are data that are representative of Beds Day. Beds Day is the first Wednesday in October. We had a total of 1,628 students enrolled in our schools. Of them, you can see the race and ethnic breakdown for the students. Of the 1,628 students, 20% were classified as a student with a disability at some point between July 1 and June 30th. 16 were classified as free and reduced lunch, or qualified, I should say, for free and reduced lunch, and 5% were English language learners. So I just want to report out on a few notable things. Sometimes the way I look at data is on a 3-year longitudinal basis, and then I also like to look back on a decade ago, because sometimes you will miss things if you only look back for 3 years and there's like slow incremental change. And I've seen this before. And this is exactly what these data points told me. If you look at, for example, our free and reduced lunch, last year it was 16%, the year before that it was 15%, and the year before that it was 14%. So not an incrementally large number from year to year, but when you go back a decade ago, we were at 9%. So if you look at your incrementally increasing about 1% a year, and a 10-year span, you can very easily go from 10 to 20% of your student population, which is a big number for us with having 1,628 of them. So the same thing is happening with the English language learner population, not as dramatic, increasing by 0.5%. And I will note that there are 5 proficiency levels of English language learners, and you are required to provide services to all 5 levels. So even the highest level, once they've sort of tested out of ENL services, we still for 2 years provide ongoing services. So the 4.5% to 5% over the past 3 years is up from 2% a decade ago. So it's a good enough number where you're required to add staff to ensure that you are meeting the needs of the changing number of students that are requiring services. The race and ethnic breakdowns don't have those kinds of big changes. Overall, there are some incremental changes with Hispanic number of students increasing and the number of white students decreasing. Those are where there's some changes for us. I'll also talk a little bit about our New York State as well as our internal formative and diagnostic assessments in iReady as they relate to ELA. So when you look at proficient in a New York State the New York State testing program for ELA, there are 4 levels which students can test at, and these are students are proficient when they're at a level 3, which is meeting the standards, or level 4, which is exceeding the standards. So this past year in 23-24, you can see the amount of students that we had that were proficient. I think it's worth noting that it's a very, very unrealistic expectation with the New York State testing program to do any sort of comparative analysis to previous year tests. And I'll go back to in 2020, during COVID, the tests were not administered. In 2021, they were 1 day, multiple choice only. Remote students were not required to test. In 22, they were reduced to 2-day untimed tests. In 23, they took the first test aligned to the next generation learning standards. In 24, in our district, grades 5 through 8 took the assessments on computers, and 3 and 4 took the assessments on paper. And this year for 2025, they're administered in the spring. All of our 3 through 8 students will be on computer. And when I say all, I should really say mostly all, because There's some nuances with the tests in terms of translations and adaptability features that doesn't allow for all students to be able to take the test on computers. So I will say overall, we fare better than our region in our results, and we also fare better than the state in our test results. We do traditionally see a dip in the grade 5 test results. It tends to be a challenging year across the board. It's congruent with state scores along with regional scores. And I know I just literally am going to contradict myself by saying it, but in past tests, grade 5, I just said we can't compare them, but grade 5 has always been our year where we do see the lowest scores. And you can see in terms of iReady, I don't want to neglect the iReady scores, that this proficiency is that they're demonstrating skills within or above the grade level band. Tests are administered over the course of the year. You are looking at the spring results. There are no results for 7th and 8th grade. In the spring, we don't administer the iReady because they're taking finals. So I just want to talk a little bit about what these data are used for. iReady is really diagnostic and formatively, but our teachers and administrators engage in a lot of data analysis on these data in different ways. We look at it from the individual student standpoint. We can look at it by standard, so the tests are broken down by which standards they measure. We can look at it by class. We can look at it by school if it's not the same, and we can also do comparative analysis of school to school. So they are part of the measures that we use for AIS. AIS is Academic Intervention Services, which is extra support for students that are struggling. There are tools within iReady. There's a teacher toolbox. We also have special licenses for some of our struggling students so that they can get specialized instruction in areas of need as identified by the assessment outcomes. Similar to ELA, I have the same data points for mathematics. In terms of where we fare, you will see higher scores in math, as this has traditionally been the case. Same history lesson that we just did for ELA applies to math in terms of the changes for the tests, and the same proficiency for New York State testing program along with iReady for math. 23 was the first administration of the New York State testing program aligned to the New York State Next Generation Math Learning Standards. And again, 24, 3 and 4 on paper, 5 through 8 computer-based. So this is a very special slide here. This is all brand new. Last year was the first administration of a grade 5 and a grade 8 New York State science test. So again, a little history. In 21, there was a written test only. So the old test used to have a performance-based. So you can see my little picture there on the left. They would have to build, use force and different things. There was an application, a hands-on application part of the assessment. In 21, because of COVID, we didn't have the performance part. In 22, grades 4 and 8 were aligned to the 96 standards. This was the last year for 4th grade. In 23, 8th grade was still aligned to the old standards. It was the last year for the grade 8 to be aligned to those standards. And then in 24, you need to really kind of understand that this is a new test. So we're like entering in a new era of science tests for grades 5 and 8. So there is no performance test. And what our team did was really an analysis of these proficiency scores are lower than what we previously had, but they are higher than the New York State averages and higher than the region. And by higher, I mean New York State 5 was 35% proficient and grade 8 was 34%. And for the region, it was 43% and 42% respectively. So 57% doesn't look good, doesn't feel good, and I recognize that. But comparatively, we are faring better. However, as you know, our teachers are quite tenacious and really studied and looked at. And I put these pictures in this arrow for a reason, to try to draw out what they talked about. These tests, I should say, felt more like a nonfiction reading test, according to our teachers and administrators that studied them. And they really did a lot more data analysis. So graphs, tables, etc. That's supposed to be some data analysis on the right. So if you think about going from many students that love science, like they love the labs, they love the hands-on experience, and they're moving from testing with that modality to looking at data and studying data, or reading nonfiction and analyzing it and providing information of that sorts. So our teachers recognized this after the administration of this test. They applied for summer curriculum writing work, and they worked over the summer, one of the many summer projects that we approved, to study and to look at what those tests did, and look at ways that that can inform their instructional lessons and their units, and how they're teaching and what kind of experiences they can provide for students. That gives us the balance of doing the hands-on projects that students love and benefit from, okay, in terms of conceptualizing and really understanding what they're learning and being able to apply it, but giving them other opportunities to look at nonfiction as it aligns to their work, along with data analysis.
Do we have a similar platform like iReady for Science? Are we thinking about that? Do they offer it?
We do not have, I don't even know if iReady has a module for science, but really it's a lot of work that's being done in the classrooms. They're doing a lot of changes in science, not just with the standards and the cross-cutting concepts and different sort of things within the science realm, but they're also changing the lab procedures and requirements. And I mean, we're even moving into new language and calling them investigations. So we are moving and adapting as a district to align to what the needs are of, New York State and what they're articulating in terms of science. Our next data set is looking at our Regents exam scores. So Regents exams, to pass, you need a 65 or better. And what is considered mastery is an 85% or better. So we have those two data points to take a look at for the couple of Regents exams. You'll notice that our district does not offer every Regents exam that New York State offers. We are required by ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act, to test in the 4 core areas. So that's why those are out to the left in green. ELA, Math, Science, and Social Studies are the 4 core. And then offer a Regents in each of those. Some of them we don't have an option, like the ELA. And then other options for graduation pathways for our students to be able to graduate. So our students fare well in terms of passing the Regents, and depending on the Regents, in terms of the mastery level scores as well. These exams also change when standards change. So in 23, I think was the first, the new administration of the U.S. History and Government. And then in 24, which is just last year, was the first administration of algebra. And what's interesting is the first time they're administering a new Regents, they take it out of the traditional Regents week at the end. They'll offer it in early June so that they could do some analytics on the scores and get them back to us in time for graduation. Our last data point is taking a look at our AP scores. We offer 24, 23 APs each year. Music theory is offered every other year, which is the varying factor, which is a good number of AP classes. As you know, scoring a 3, 4, or 5 can typically lead to high school students getting college credit, depending upon where they're going, depending upon their program, for work that they're doing in high school. So this is a great opportunity, not just for our students to potentially earn college credit, but for them to engage in a rigorous learning opportunity that we also provide a lot of support for them to see this kind of success rates with their scores. I think it's important to know that in Pleasantville, we have open enrollment, which means that some of these courses, there are 2 that do not. However, the rest of the 23 up there, 23 up there, there are prerequisites that are required. There are 2 that are not, which is a great opportunity, again, for all students to enter. Of course, our wonderful counselors help guide and advise in terms of balancing the amount of AP classes a student is taking, which classes they have the prereqs for, and which classes they might want to try and see how they could do on an AP score. So for the most part, our AP, I'll call it proficiency, it's really 3, 4, or 5 levels, outrank national scores on many of these exams. So I'll point out there are a couple of them that don't, and of the 3 that do not, 2 of them are the ones that don't have prerequisites that we encourage our students to try. The teachers that teach the AP courses, we have had turnover in some of these courses. They have to go and get trained by the college board. So we provide that professional learning opportunity. It's actually required for them to go to the college board and get trained in order to be able to teach this class. These tests are not just administered nationally, but also internationally. So there's a lot of different benchmarks, and there's a standardization, which is why it could lead to that college credit.
Do we track these over, I mean, we see these every year. Do we track them over multiple years? I assume we do, and we look at and make adjustments as necessary if we see a trend that's not positive.
Same data analysis on the AP scores as we see in the New York State testing program. Looking at each test, looking at what students did well with, what they didn't do well with. I've been in an AP, I forgot which one of these English classes, where the teacher was actually going over the rubric and looking at specific areas. So it's not just based on the test results, but like they know what the outcomes are. Many of them have longevity in teaching these classes, in where students fall short on that rubric and working specifically in that area. So it's done throughout the class, time period, throughout the 10, it's actually, these are done in May. So they don't even get 10 months to fully teach. And it's really more, it's like May in the 20s, right? Where they administer them. So they have, just short of 9 months to get ready to take these exams. So, there's a lot of factors that can impact these test scores. They're kids, right? So as individuals, as classes, as cohorts, how they interact with the instructor in terms of how that all is meshing. These tests have also, most of them have come to be computer-based as well. And I think I spoke about this at a different board meeting. You have your PSATs, SATs, many of the APs, your 3 through 8 tests, et cetera. Yeah, when we're talking about advocacy for the NYSESLAT and the NYSETEL, a lot of these tests are all moving towards computer-based, and that is an adjustment. Some of the features for students with disabilities that have accommodations work really well in some platforms and not so well in others. So there's a lot to be considered in terms of fluctuating scores. Obviously, when we have trends, we're looking at where students, some of these tests are just really hard tests. And some of them are really hard tests, and only a select few students are taking them. Last year, when we looked at this data, we had a couple of tests where we didn't even report out on scores because we didn't even have 5 or more students taking them. So you really have kind of like, some of these are just like a very select niche type of teaching and learning that's going on that's specific to that type of student and what they're sort of looking for. I mean, to think about Calc BC having 7 students and that 100% of them got a 3, 4, and 5, That's a tall accomplishment, as well as something like looking at the psychology that doesn't have a prereq. And we have 44 courageous souls that wanted to take that class last year and take that AP exam. And more than half of them received a score equivalent to, for many, a college level class. Like, that's a great opportunity and that's a great learning experience. So proud of the work that our staff and our students do in pursuit of some AP scores. So I just wanted to end with the mission and really taking a look at, it's beautifully followed that we have a very numerical heavy presentation following the beautiful work that is done to support students and being able to achieve this work. And I really think it's a testament to the maybe written and or unwritten, the focus of the school district on the whole child and making sure that we are supporting our students in order to be able to achieve these types of results, and that it is an ongoing process and they are not a single data point. There is absolutely nothing simple about the work that we do here as educators and as supporters of the educational process. I often think about the notion of the art and science that occurs for the magic of the teaching and learning process to happen. And there is no magic formula that brings that to our students and our staff and our faculty. So I'm just very proud of the work that is done here. I'm very proud of our students and the commitment they have and our families, and of course the board for supporting this work. Thank you.